Elvis's stage costumes in the 1970s featured mysterious symbols that weren't just decoration. They were coded messages sent to a secret organization. In 1976, Elvis stopped using these symbols, and 13 months later, he was dead. Was this really just a coincidence? The first clue that something sinister was happening in Elvis's career came from an unexpected source: his costume designer, Bill Belew. In 1970, when Elvis returned to live performances after his movie career, Belew began incorporating specific symbols into the King's iconic jumpsuits. At first, these seemed like typical rock and roll imagery: lightning bolts, eagles, and geometric patterns that caught the stage lights and dazzled audiences. But a closer examination of these symbols reveals a pattern that goes far deeper than mere decoration. The most significant symbol appeared on Elvis's famous American Eagle jumpsuit, first worn during his 1973 Aloha from Hawaii concert. The eagle design wasn't just patriotic imagery. It incorporated specific geometric patterns that matched symbols found in historical secret society documents. The positioning of the eagle's wings formed a perfect triangle, with additional smaller triangles embedded throughout the design. Most telling was the eye symbol positioned directly over Elvis's heart, a detail that would become crucial to understanding the true message being sent. Before we dive deeper into this incredible conspiracy, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. What you're about to learn will change everything you thought you knew about Elvis Presley and the music industry. Bill Belew later revealed in interviews that Elvis himself had requested these specific symbols, though he was vague about why. Elvis would bring me drawings, Belew remembered, strange geometric patterns and symbols. He'd say they were important, that people needed to see them. But he never explained what they meant. What Belew didn't know at the time was that Elvis was engaged in a secret war against one of the most powerful organizations in the entertainment industry. The symbols on Elvis's costumes weren't random. They were carefully chosen counter-symbols designed to neutralize the influence of what Elvis had discovered was a vast network controlling the music industry. Each costume became a weapon in this hidden battle, worn on stages across America as Elvis delivered his coded message to those who knew how to read it. The fact that millions of people saw these symbols during his concerts wasn't accidental. It was essential to their effectiveness. The most dramatic example came during Elvis's 1974 concert at the Las Vegas Hilton, when he wore a jumpsuit covered in what appeared to be random star patterns. But when analyzed by symbol experts decades later, the star arrangement matched exactly the constellation patterns used in ancient protective rituals. Elvis wasn't just entertaining his audience that night, he was performing a mass protection ceremony using his fame and the power of television to broadcast these symbols to millions of homes across America. The story of how Elvis discovered the secret organization controlling the music industry begins in 1969, during a chance encounter that would change his life forever. While visiting Sun Record Studio for a nostalgic trip back to where his career began, Elvis met a former music executive named Samuel Rothschild, who had worked behind the scenes for major record labels since the 1940s. Rothschild was dying of cancer and had decided to reveal secrets he had kept for decades. He told Elvis about a group he called the Harmonic Council, a secret organization that had been manipulating the music industry since the early 1900s. According to Rothschild, this group didn't just influence which songs became hits, they controlled the entire cultural direction of popular music, using it to shape public opinion and social movements. The revelation that shook Elvis most was learning that his own career had been orchestrated by this group from the very beginning. His meteoric rise to fame, the specific songs chosen for his early releases, even his military service, all of it had been planned and controlled by the Harmonic Council. They had identified Elvis as someone who could influence American culture on a massive scale, and they had been pulling the strings behind his success. But Elvis had never been an easy person to control, and by the late 1960s, the Harmonic Council was growing concerned about his independence. His spiritual interests, his growing awareness of social issues, and his desire to record more meaningful music were all seen as threats to their agenda. Rothschild warned Elvis that other artists who had tried to break free from the council's control had faced mysterious career setbacks, personal scandals, or worse. The most chilling part of Rothschild's revelation was his description of how the Harmonic Council operated. They didn't just control record labels and radio stations, they had infiltrated every level of the entertainment industry. Managers, agents, music publishers, even some journalists were either members or unwitting assets of the organization. They used a complex system of symbols and coded language to communicate with each other, identifying allies and enemies within the industry. Elvis learned that certain songs were actually vehicles for subliminal messaging, designed to influence listeners' thoughts and behaviors. The council had teams of psychologists and occult specialists who crafted lyrics and melodies to achieve specific psychological effects. Popular music wasn't just entertainment, it was a sophisticated form of mass mind control, and Elvis had been one of their primary weapons. Have you ever wondered why certain songs seem to stick in your head for days, or why some music makes you feel emotions that don't match your actual mood? According to what Elvis discovered, this wasn't accidental. Armed with this knowledge, Elvis began his secret rebellion against the Harmonic Council in 1970. But he couldn't simply walk away from his career or speak publicly about what he had learned. The council's reach was too extensive, and they had too much power to destroy him if he made a direct challenge. Instead, Elvis chose a more subtle approach. He would fight them using their own methods. Working with a small group of trusted advisors who believed his story, Elvis began incorporating protective and counter symbols into his performances. These weren't random designs chosen for aesthetic appeal. They were carefully researched symbols drawn from various spiritual and esoteric traditions, specifically chosen for their ability to neutralize negative influences and protect both Elvis and his audiences from psychological manipulation. The most important ally in this effort was Larry Geller, Elvis's spiritual advisor and hairdresser, who had extensive knowledge of mysticism and symbology. Geller helped Elvis understand which symbols would be most effective and how to properly incorporate them into his costumes and stage performances. Together, they turned Elvis's concerts into massive protective rituals, using the power of his fame to broadcast positive energy to counteract the Harmonic Council's negative influence. The results were immediate and dramatic. Audiences at Elvis's concerts in the early 1970s reported feeling unusually uplifted and energized, experiences that went far beyond normal entertainment. Many fans described spiritual experiences during his performances, feeling a sense of peace and protection that lasted for days after the concert. What they didn't realize was that they were participating in a form of mass healing ceremony designed to break the psychological hold that manipulated music had on the American public. The Harmonic Council quickly noticed what Elvis was doing, and they began taking countermeasures. Record executives started pressuring Elvis to change his stage presentation, claiming that his new costumes were too elaborate and distracting from the music. They suggested he return to simpler outfits, similar to what he had worn in the 1950s. When Elvis refused, they began undermining him in more subtle ways. Concert venues suddenly became difficult to book, technical problems plagued his performances, and negative reviews appeared in publications that had previously been supportive. The council was using their network of influence to make Elvis's life as difficult as possible, hoping to force him back into compliance. But Elvis continued his symbolic rebellion, understanding that too much was at stake to give up. The most dramatic confrontation came during Elvis's 1973 Aloha from Hawaii special, which was broadcast live via satellite to over 1 billion people worldwide. Elvis wore his most symbol-heavy costume for this performance, essentially broadcasting his protective message to the largest audience in television history. The Harmonic Council was furious, but they couldn't stop the broadcast without revealing their own involvement in the entertainment industry. By 1974, the Harmonic Council's patience with Elvis was wearing thin. They had tried subtle pressure and indirect manipulation, but Elvis continued to defy them through his symbolic rebellion. The organization decided it was time for more direct action, beginning a campaign of psychological warfare designed to break Elvis's will and force him back into compliance. The first sign of this escalated campaign came in the form of strange phone calls to Graceland. Elvis began receiving calls at all hours of the day and night from people who claimed to know about his little game with the costumes. The callers would describe specific symbols Elvis had worn, explaining their true meanings and warning him about the consequences of continuing his rebellion. These calls were clearly from people with extensive knowledge of symbology and Elvis's personal life, suggesting they came from within the Harmonic Council itself. More disturbing were the threats that began appearing in Elvis's fan mail. Mixed in with normal letters from admirers were messages that contained veiled warnings about the price of defiance and the fate of those who betray their purpose. These letters used language and symbols that made it clear they weren't from ordinary fans. They were carefully crafted psychological attacks designed to create fear and paranoia. The council also began targeting Elvis's inner circle, attempting to turn his closest advisors against him. Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, began expressing concerns about Elvis's increasingly erratic behavior and his obsession with mystical nonsense. Parker pushed for Elvis to return to a simpler stage presentation, arguing that the elaborate costumes were hurting his commercial appeal. What Elvis didn't know at the time was that Parker had been compromised by the council years earlier. Even more troubling was the discovery that some of Elvis's prescription medications had been tampered with. Pills that were supposed to help him sleep or manage pain were causing unexpected side effects, paranoia, confusion, and emotional instability that made it difficult for him to think clearly about his situation. The council was using Elvis's dependence on medication as a weapon against him, gradually increasing his psychological instability while maintaining plausible deniability. Elvis's response to these escalating pressures was to double down on his symbolic rebellion. He began incorporating even more powerful protective symbols into his costumes, and he started researching advanced techniques for broadcasting positive energy through his performances. But the constant stress of fighting this hidden war was taking a severe toll on his physical and mental health. The situation reached a crisis point in 1975 when Elvis received a package at Graceland containing photographs of his daughter Lisa Marie at school, along with a note that simply read, "Beautiful child." It would be tragic if anything happened to her because of her father's poor choices. This direct threat against his daughter shook Elvis to his core and marked the beginning of his consideration of more drastic measures. In early 1976, Elvis made a decision that would ultimately seal his fate. Instead of backing down in the face of threats against his daughter, he chose to escalate his fight against the Harmonic Council by attempting to expose them publicly. Working with a small team of trusted investigators, Elvis began gathering evidence of the council's activities, planning to reveal their existence to the world through a series of interviews and a tell-all book. The evidence Elvis collected was damning. Financial records showed suspicious money transfers between record labels and shadowy organizations. Recording session logs revealed instances where songs had been modified without the artist's knowledge to include subliminal messaging. Most significantly, Elvis had obtained membership lists that revealed how extensively the Harmonic Council had infiltrated the entertainment industry. The plan was to release this information gradually, starting with carefully chosen journalists who had proven themselves resistant to industry pressure. Elvis would begin by discussing his own experiences with symbolic messaging in his costumes, then slowly reveal the larger conspiracy. The goal was to create enough public awareness that the Harmonic Council would lose their ability to operate in secret. But the Harmonic Council had sources everywhere, and they learned about Elvis's plans before he could implement them. In mid-1976, Elvis received a final ultimatum: abandon his investigation and return to using their approved symbols in his performances or face consequences that would extend far beyond his own career. To emphasize their seriousness, they arranged for several of Elvis's close friends to suffer suspicious accidents and career setbacks. Elvis's response was characteristically defiant. Instead of backing down, he stopped using symbols altogether in his 1976 and early 1977 performances. This wasn't surrender. It was a different kind of rebellion. By refusing to participate in symbolic messaging of any kind, Elvis was essentially going on strike, denying the Harmonic Council the use of his massive influence while he continued gathering evidence against them. The council interpreted this as an act of war. Elvis had crossed a line from which there would be no return, and they began planning his elimination. The method they chose was particularly cruel. They would use Elvis's own weaknesses against him, accelerating his decline through manipulated medications and psychological pressure until his death appeared to be the result of his well-known health problems. The final phase of their plan involved infiltrating Elvis's medical care. Dr. George Nikopoulos, Elvis's personal physician, began receiving pressure from pharmaceutical companies and medical boards to adjust Elvis's treatment regimen. New medications were introduced that interacted dangerously with Elvis's existing prescriptions, creating a cocktail of substances that would prove lethal when combined in the right quantities. Have you ever wondered why so many talented musicians seem to struggle with addiction and mental health issues? After learning about Elvis's experience with the Harmonic Council, the pattern becomes disturbingly clear. The final months of Elvis's life were marked by his desperate attempt to complete his exposé of the Harmonic Council before they could silence him permanently. Despite his deteriorating health and the constant psychological pressure, Elvis continued gathering evidence and preparing his revelations. He knew he was running out of time, but he was determined to leave behind enough information for others to continue his fight. In July 1977, Elvis met secretly with investigative journalist James Bacon, providing him with a substantial amount of documentation about the Harmonic Council's activities. Elvis made Bacon promise to publish the information if anything happened to him, creating what he hoped would be a dead man's switch that would ensure the truth came out, even if he didn't survive to tell it himself. The evidence Elvis provided included financial records, correspondence between council members, and detailed descriptions of their symbol systems and psychological manipulation techniques. Most importantly, he gave Bacon a list of other artists who had been targeted by the council, including several who had died under suspicious circumstances after trying to break free from their control. But the Harmonic Council had anticipated this move, and they had been monitoring Elvis's communications for months. Within days of his meeting with Bacon, the journalist received threats against his family and professional pressure from his editors to drop the story. The evidence Elvis had provided mysteriously disappeared from Bacon's files, and he was forced to abandon his investigation. Meanwhile, Elvis's health was rapidly declining due to the manipulated medications he was receiving. The combination of drugs in his system was creating a perfect storm of physical and psychological symptoms that made it impossible for him to think clearly or continue his investigation effectively. The council had engineered a situation where Elvis would appear to have died from his own excesses, providing perfect cover for what was actually an assassination. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley died at Graceland under circumstances that appeared to be an accidental overdose. But according to the conspiracy theory, this was the planned culmination of the Harmonic Council's campaign against him. They had successfully eliminated their most dangerous enemy while making his death appear to be the result of his own self-destructive behavior. The cover-up extended beyond Elvis's death. Colonel Parker immediately took control of Elvis's estate, ensuring that any remaining evidence of the council's activities would never see the light of day. Key documents were destroyed, witnesses were intimidated into silence, and the official narrative of Elvis's death was carefully crafted to focus on his health problems rather than the larger conspiracy. In the decades since Elvis's death, several other musicians have died under similar circumstances after attempting to expose corruption in the music industry. The pattern is always the same. An artist becomes aware of manipulation and control within the industry. They attempt to speak out or break free, and they end up dead from apparent overdoses or accidents that conveniently silence them forever. Today, researchers continue to investigate the Harmonic Council's activities, though they now operate under different names and have adapted their methods to the digital age. The symbols that Elvis fought against in the 1970s have evolved into more sophisticated forms of psychological manipulation, using social media algorithms and streaming platform recommendations to influence public opinion and behavior. The tragic irony of Elvis's story is that his rebellion against the Harmonic Council may have made their control even stronger. By eliminating their most visible opponent, they sent a clear message to other artists about the consequences of defiance. The music industry became more compliant and controlled than ever, with artists unwitting participants in their own manipulation. What do you think about this hidden chapter of Elvis's life in the music industry? Have you ever noticed patterns of symbols or psychological manipulation in popular music? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The story of Elvis's secret war against the Harmonic Council reminds us that the entertainment industry may not be as innocent as it appears. Behind the glamour and celebrity, there may be darker forces at work, using our love of music and entertainment to influence our thoughts and behaviors in ways we never imagined. Whether or not you believe in conspiracy theories, Elvis's story raises important questions about power, control, and the price of artistic independence. In an industry worth billions of dollars and capable of influencing millions of people, the temptation to use that power for manipulation rather than entertainment may be too great for some to resist. If this incredible story of secret symbols and hidden control opened your eyes to new possibilities, please subscribe for more investigations into the mysteries surrounding music's greatest legends. Hit that notification bell and share this video with someone who questions the official narratives about their favorite artists.